Washington Post fact-checkers weighed in, and they gave Bill Nelson 4 Pinocchios. And then Rick Scott hammered Nelson, demanding he provide proof of Russia's successful hacking. All in all, Nelson's assertion was used by his political opponents to not too subtly suggest that the then 75-year-old senator was past his prime and slipping. Nelson went on to lose by just over 10,000 votes out of more than 8 million cast statewide. Well, turns out Nelson wasn't slipping. In fact, he was right. And all the people that ridiculed him and fact-checked him were wrong. Because today we found out via the new governor, Republican Ron DeSantis, that in fact the Russians did penetrate 2 Florida counties' voter files in 2016. DeSantis announced this publicly and assured everyone they did not change any of the data, although that's not super reassuring given that it appears they clearly could have. Also, weirdly, DeSantis says he signed a non-disclosure agreement which bars him from saying which 2 counties were hacked by the Russians. The Tampa Bay Times described the scene, quote, DeSantis' comments came during a surreal Capitol News conference during which he wouldn't elaborate on the highly unusual situation of the federal government asking a governor to sign a non-disclosure agreement, especially in a case involving that governor's own state. So, Bill Nelson spoke the truth and was ridiculed and punished and ultimately lost. And now the question is, do people like Rick Scott or Donald Trump or anyone else in charge have any genuine incentive to preserve the integrity of our voting systems if they think any intrusions might ultimately redound to their benefit?
I don't keep track of regrets, and I don't add up the years. But what I do count on
on $60 billion in U.S. goods. Today was up as markets regained their form, although who the heck knows why that happens on any given day? Certainly I don't. But it is strange the ways in which the titans of finance and the Republican Party and the business press seem weirdly at peace with our growing trade war, which blasted off again last Friday when Trump hiked tariffs from 10% to 25% on $200 billion in Chinese goods. Mitch McConnell was decidedly diplomatic about the whole thing today.
One thing I think we all agree on is that nobody wins a trade war, and we're all hoping, as others have suggested here, that these particular tactics get us into a better position vis-a-vis China, which has been our worst and most unfair trading relationship for a very long time.
And talk more about this ongoing trade war, I'm joined by Austin Goolsbee, former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Barack Obama. Do you agree with me that there seems generally less freaking out about this than one would expect, certainly than I would have expected if, say, Barack Obama were pursuing this strategy?
Well, I agree with that part. That, Republicans would have been up in arms if Barack Obama did anything. But I think a lot of the business community and even the business conservatives are really, really upset and nervous about this. While today the stock market did not go down, we've had multiple days of multi-hundred drops in the Dow, and you've got CEOs who are normally absolutely toting the Trump line, getting up and saying, wait, this will not work and we shouldn't do it. And you've got the entire farm, agriculture, and rural communities in most of the states of the United States in an abject panic. As you know, farm incomes have already been down. They've been running through a tough period. And this is to put a $50 billion tax on American consumers and penalize American farmers. And I think you're going to see thousands of them go bankrupt if this continues.
So here's the argument that I'm going to give the best case argument for pursuing this strategy and get your response. Basically, American leadership has been asleep at the switch for 30 years while this incredibly dysfunctional relationship has grown up between the U.S. and China. It is they are now bound to each other. It's complicated. There are enormous capital and goods and services flows between the two countries. But fundamentally, China's cheating. They're using industrial policy. They're manipulating their currency. They're stealing IP, they're doing all these things, and there's no way to stop them from doing that without some pain, and someone's got to stand up and say, look, we're going to not do this anymore. What do you say to that argument?
I mean, what I say two things. I think that's confused, and the Trump administration hasn't done their homework. That's a fundamental problem here. So we have succeeded in the past at getting China to change their behavior. We got them to stop being a currency manipulator, for example. And the way we did that was we got all of our allies on the same page. We went to them behind the scenes, not attempting public humiliation, and we said, here's what we want you to do. All of us are on board with the same thing, and if you don't do it, we're going to have to do A, B, and C. And that got them to stop. What the Trump administration's done is try to publicly humiliate them while making us pay, the American people. We're the ones paying this tariff. It's our farmers. It's General Motors saying they lost $1 billion last year because of these Trump tariffs, and they're not accomplishing anything. They haven't done their homework. They don't even know what they're asking for. They're just piling tariff upon tariff. They were bluffing. And now we're getting into this spiraling trade war, which if that continues to spiral, I think it's going to lead to a recession in both of our countries. We should just take a step back and go about this the way that has been documented to work in the past, which is not the way they're doing.
But I guess the response of a lot of people would be that it hasn't worked, in that fundamentally the U.S.-China relationship has not been good for the U.S. It's given us a lot of cheap goods, particularly a lot of cheap electronics. It's been very good for China, but fundamentally has been bad and been part of the sort of wage stagnation, hollowing out the American middle class. Business as usual doesn't work, is the argument.
Yeah, look, I know they keep saying that, but how does putting a $50 billion tax on American consumers actually achieve anything? It's not. They told us that they were going to raise our taxes $50 billion, cripple our farmers, but it would just be a short-run thing and probably would never even be enacted because the Chinese were going to do what we wanted. Well, they didn't, and they didn't even ask for anything specific. So how would China even do that? And at the same time, we've now got our own allies in Europe, in Canada, in Mexico, in Japan, threatened with trade wars from this president, now more likely to actually side with China against the United States at the WTO than the opposite. It's completely bonkers.
You know, I hadn't thought of that last part, but that's an important one. I mean, having gone through these skirmishes now individually with allies, there's every reason for them not to be particularly supportive of what we're doing here.
Of course, they're not supportive. They're irritated. They're angry. We're about to slap tariffs on Canada and on Europe, and Europe is about to have tariffs against the U.S.
All right, Austin Goolsbee, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
That is all in for this evening. The Rachel Maddow Show starts right now. Good evening, Rach.
Good evening, Chris. Thanks, my friend. Much appreciated. And thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. Very happy to have you with us. If the great Oprah Winfrey were running the scandals of the Trump administration as a daytime talk show, today's episode of that talk show would be the one where the audience was invited by Oprah to all check under their seats, because yes, it's true. Everybody here, you get a subpoena, and you get a subpoena, and everybody gets a subpoena. Everybody's got one under their seats right now. Since the special counsel's investigation was ended, under circumstances we still don't totally understand. And since the special counsel, Robert Mueller, submitted his report about that investigation, we've been living in this very specific era, right? This very specific world of confrontation. I mean, the president and the Trump administration had an initial burst of claiming vindication and exoneration by that report, and the attorney general characterizing the report in ways that couldn't be checked by anybody. But that whole era lasted like 5 seconds. Since then, they have bolted themselves down into an increasingly hardened effort to try to block access to Mueller himself, to block access to Mueller's findings, to block access to witnesses who testified to Mueller, to block the production of documents that were used in Mueller's investigation or that pertain to his findings or to the subject of his investigation, and to block Congress from obtaining any information, any documents, or access to any witnesses that could help Congress follow up on what Mueller did. And, importantly, that could help Congress follow up on what we now know Mueller did not investigate. I mean, before the Trump administration, it was pretty much a settled matter as to whether or not a White House and a president had to comply with court orders and subpoenas. I mean, yeah, executive branches and Congresses always fight about all sorts of things, right? And all presidents try to keep some stuff secret. But there was a unanimous Supreme Court decision that sort of teed up the whole cataclysmic end of the Watergate scandal, right? There was U.S. v. Nixon, unanimous decision by the Supreme Court, which said, yeah, presidents do have to respond to subpoenas and court orders. Before now, that has not been considered one of the more controversial decisions in American jurisprudence. Everybody sort of thinks of that as a settled matter, right? But now we are in this era where we have got this incredible clash happening, right? Since the Mueller report was submitted, such as it is, since the Mueller investigation ended, since the country has had to decide what to do with the end of that investigation and the consequences of what Mueller has been allowed to say thus far, we are in this moment where, according to this White House, all voluntary requests for information and testimony are to be denied. That is why it's raining subpoenas now. And now we've got the president and the White House trying to erect a legal justification or mount a legal war effort to try to stop everybody from complying with all subpoenas, too, at least for as long as they can get away with it. Well, one of those subpoena fights was potentially resolved today in a sort of unusual way. It's about the president's eldest son and namesake, Donald Trump Jr. He testified to Senate intel, among other things, about the Trump Tower Moscow project in 2017. There are indications that the contours of his testimony very much matched what Michael Cohen also testified to Congress about when it came to the Trump Tower Moscow project. Now, Cohen later admitted in court that his testimony was false. That's part of why he is serving time in federal prison right now as we speak. Did Donald Trump Jr. tell the same lies to the Intelligence Committee about Trump Tower Moscow? If so, why was Michael Cohen prosecuted for that and Donald Trump Jr. has not been, right? It's not an unreasonable question in these circumstances where Michael Cohen is literally locked up right now in a federal prison cell for that. And Donald Trump Jr. is still out in the wild with these questions still outstanding about the veracity of his testimony on that same topic. But the Intelligence Committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee, they did at least try to arrange for Donald Trump Jr. to come back in and clarify his testimony. There were reportedly protracted negotiations about him coming back in on a voluntary basis. He reportedly stood the committee up and refused to come back in on a voluntary basis. That's what led to this recent subpoena ordering him to testify whether he wanted to or not. Now, the White House and Donald Trump Jr. have been signaling that they would resist that subpoena among all the other subpoenas they want resisted as well. But now tonight, they do appear to have come to some sort of negotiated accommodation. Donald Trump Jr. will reportedly appear behind closed doors before the Senate Intelligence Committee next month under a new agreement in which the number of topics he's asked about and the amount of time he has to testify will both be limited by agreement in advance. That's the kind of agreement, right? Limiting the total amount of time, limiting the topics you can be asked about. That's the type of agreement you would usually think would be negotiated in the context of a voluntary request for someone to appear, right? You wouldn't expect a committee with subpoena power to make that kind of agreement, right? To agree to those kinds of limitations and accommodations. Frankly, with subpoena power, they have the ability to compel you to comply. They have the ability to compel you to show up and testify without any terms and accommodations. Why would they negotiate? But hey, this is a Trump family member, and so special treatment, I suppose, is a given here. And incidentally, that means the Trump White House and the Trump family have thus been given their first reward for this blanket stance they've taken since the Mueller report was submitted, in which they say that all subpoenas should be defied. Apparently, that stance already earned them relief from some of the things that Donald Trump Jr. would otherwise have been compelled to testify about. Apparently, that stance has also earned them a time limitation on the things, on the amount of time that he'll have to spend testifying. So we got the news today about Donald Jr., the resolution of that subpoena fight, at least it appears that way. And on the heels of that news that we got late today about Donald Trump Jr. and Senate Intelligence, we also got remarkable new news from the other Intelligence Committee, from the one in the House. News that lawyers working for President Trump and the Trump Organization and for the president's adult children, their lawyers themselves may be on the hook or may be at least compelled to spill when it comes to one of the alleged obstruction of justice efforts that's described in some detail in Mueller's redacted report. This is from Volume 2, page 134 of Mueller's report. Quote, after the media began questioning Trump's connections to Russia, Michael Cohen promoted a party line that publicly distanced Trump from Russia and asserted he had no business there. Cohen continued to adhere to that party line in 2017 when Congress asked him to provide documents and testimony in its Russia investigation. In an attempt to minimize the president's connection to Russia, Cohen submitted a letter to Congress falsely stating that he only briefed Trump on the Trump Tower Moscow project 3 times, that he did not consider asking Trump to travel to Russia, that Cohen had not received a response to an outreach he made to the Russian government, and he testified that the project ended in January 2016, before the first Republican caucus or primary. None of those things were true. While working on that false congressional statement, Cohen had extensive discussions with the president's personal counsel, who, according to Cohen, said Cohen should not contradict the president. Cohen eventually entered into a joint defense agreement with the president and other individuals who were part of the Russia investigation. Cohen's false statement to Congress was circulated in advance Cohen's false statement to Congress was circulated in advance to and edited by members of that joint defense agreement. Before the statement was finalized, early drafts contained a sentence stating, the building project led me to make limited contacts with Russian government officials. But in the final version of the statement, that line was deleted. Cohen thought he was told that it was a decision of the joint defense agreement to delete that sentence about his contacts with Russian government officials. Cohen did not push back on the deletion. Cohen said the release of his opening remarks was intended to shape the narrative and let other people who might be witnesses know what Cohen was saying so they could follow the same message. Cohen recalled that on September 20th, after Cohen's opening remarks had been printed by the media, the president's personal counsel told him that the president was pleased with his Trump Tower Moscow statement. The president was pleased with it. Cohen stated that the president's personal counsel responded it was not necessary to elaborate or include these details the president stated, go back to that for a second. Cohen stated that the president's personal counsel advised him ahead of his testimony that it was not necessary to elaborate or include some of the details that he had planned to give about his contacts with the Russian government and President Trump's notice about the Trump Tower Moscow project. So this is all what's described in the Mueller report about Michael Cohen and his testimony about the Trump Tower Moscow project. The president was very pleased with his statement to Congress, right? The president was happy with that statement, with what he told Congress about Trump Tower Moscow. What the president was so pleased for, we later find out, of course, was a false statement to Congress about Trump Tower Moscow, for which Michael Cohen is now in prison. But what Cohen is alleging here, what Cohen told Mueller, is that the president's personal counsel, Jay Sekulow, and other lawyers involved in the joint defense agreement, they specifically shaped his statement, including taking out the stuff about his contacts with the Russian government. Well, Michael Cohen is already paying for that. He is in prison paying for that false statement. But what about the other people who were allegedly involved in crafting that false statement for him in that act of obstruction, right? Well, that's why all of those lawyers working for the president and the Trump Organization and the president's adult children, that's why all of those lawyers may soon get subpoenas under their seats, too.
If there were others that were participating in that act of obstruction of justice, if there were others that were knowing of that false statement, participated in the drafting of that false statement, we need to know about it. We need to expose it. And we need to deter other people from coming before our committee and lying. Mr. Cohen's testimony was important, but also the documentary record is important. And it raises profound questions about whether Michael Cohen alone, without assistance, without encouragement, would take it upon himself to mislead our committee about Donald Trump's pursuit of money in Russia during the campaign.
That was Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff today, speaking to reporters after the news broke that his committee demanded documents and testimony from Jay Sekulow, the president's personal counsel, as described in the Mueller report. Also, Alan Futerfas and Ellen Garten and Abby Lowell, who represent the president's business and his adult children, and who were part of this joint defense agreement, which Michael Cohen says was used for a criminal and corrupt purpose to get him to lie to Congress about the Trump Tower Moscow deal. Well, now, those lawyers are being told to hand over documents and also to testify themselves. What we learned today is that back in March, those lawyers were told by the Intelligence Committee that they needed to hand over documents related to that alleged obstruction of justice, documents related to the drafting of Michael Cohen's false statement to Congress, documents about the joint defense agreement, documents and communications about whether pardons were offered or discussed for Cohen or other witnesses, statements about the Trump Tower Moscow project, tons of stuff. I mean, the document request itself is sort of stunning. I mean, even just the pardon part of it is amazing. I mean, these lawyers are being told, I'll just read you the pardon part of it. They're being told to hand over documents or communications about, quote, a presidential pre-pardon, global pardon, pardon or other pardon-related concept for or related to Michael Cohen, Jared Kushner, Donald Trump Jr., Ivanka Trump, the Trump Organization, Paul Manafort, Michael Flynn, Roger Stone, Keith Schiller, Rhoda Graf, Felix Sater, or any witness who testified before the committee or who was asked to testify before the committee. Discussions of a global pardon, a pre-pardon, a potential pardon for the president's secretary and bodyguard. I mean, what we learned today is that this document request and the request for testimony by those lawyers, who, again here, basically accused by Michael Cohen of engaging in criminal behavior themselves. I mean, this demand from the committee, it started in March. It was rejected by these lawyers. It's been reiterated by the committee now, and now it looks like we are on the brink of these lawyers being subpoenaed. As the New York Times puts it tonight, quote, the lawyers have so far balked at the committee's requests, but Congressman Schiff is prepared to issue subpoenas to compel cooperation if necessary. You know, I think it has long been assumed that the president might have a kind of tripwire when it comes to investigations or legal liability getting too close to his adult children. I mean, in this case, according to reporting from Vanity Fair and the New York Times, one of the allegations at issue here, for which there is apparently some sort of documentary trail, is the allegation that lawyer Abbe Lowell specifically told Cohen that he should tell Congress Ivanka Trump had essentially no knowledge of Trump Tower Moscow. According to Michael Cohen, that wasn't true. According to Cohen, Ivanka Trump was regularly briefed on Trump Tower Moscow. Well, if, as Cohen alleges, Abbe Lowell was involved in telling Michael Cohen to lie to Congress specifically about the involvement of Ivanka Trump in that scheme, I mean, that feels like the sort of thing that could trip 50 tripwires all at once, right? That's sensitive on a lot of different levels. But that is apparently now what the House Intelligence Committee is chasing down, and we are being told to expect that that may be in the form of subpoenas soon. We are also told by the Intelligence Committee tonight that as of this evening, they are in negotiations with the Justice Department over yet another subpoena that they issued last week for the redacted material that's been cut out of the Mueller report and for the counterintelligence information and findings and evidence that were turned up by Mueller's investigation, but not included in the version of Mueller's report that we've all seen. Now, the deadline for the Justice Department to comply with that subpoena for the unredacted report and the underlying evidence and all the intelligence information turned up by the investigation, that deadline on that subpoena is tomorrow. We don't know exactly what it means that the committee's in negotiations with the Justice Department tonight over the terms of that subpoena and that tomorrow deadline. The last time we were in this circumstance, though, it was a subpoena from the Judiciary Committee, which was being ignored by the Attorney General. And in that case, the response was that the Attorney General was swiftly subject to a contempt vote. I mean, so we'll see how this develops. This may very well go that same direction. It's worth watching this overnight and into tomorrow morning, though, because the subpoena deadline, a subpoena deadline is a real deadline. And that deadline is tomorrow. And the conflict over this one, I mean, this particular subpoena that the Attorney General seems poised to defy, this one, because it's from the Intelligence Committee and because it's for that specific information they're asking for, this one may finally shed some light on what's emerging since Mueller's investigation was ended as kind of the biggest open question that remains about what happened with that investigation. Right? The Intelligence Committee has issued a subpoena to obtain the counterintelligence information and the foreign intelligence information that Mueller turned up. They shouldn't have to issue a subpoena to get that. Under black letter law, under federal statute, the intelligence committees are supposed to be able to get that whenever they want it. They're supposed to get briefed whenever they want to on matters at the Justice Department or in any other investigating agency that pertain to counterintelligence or foreign intelligence. That's their purview. They have oversight over all of that. So they get access to anything that touches that area. Nothing is classified from them. Well, the Intelligence Committee Chairman, Adam Schiff, has been saying that his committee hasn't been receiving those briefings. They haven't received any information on any foreign intelligence or counterintelligence related to Mueller's investigation since James Comey was fired back in 2017. They've gotten nothing. Well, that revelation from Adam Schiff and the fact that we can now see the redacted Mueller report, and the redacted Mueller report has no information at all on the counterintelligence consequences of any factual information they turned up. Those two things together have led to this sort of slowly dawning revelation that Mueller might have not done a counterintelligence investigation at all. That if there was a counterintelligence investigation into the Russia attack and potential links to President Trump or the Trump campaign, it looks like maybe Mueller isn't the one who did it. I mean, we know that a counterintelligence investigation was started. We know that one was authorized and opened at the FBI. We know that a counterintelligence investigation was publicly announced by James Comey to Congress when he was still FBI director. I mean, in terms of what that investigation might look at, off the top of your head, you right now could list 10 important questions that a counterintelligence investigation on this matter might possibly be looking into. I mean, just start with Trump Tower alone, Trump Tower Moscow alone. But it really doesn't appear that Robert Mueller and his investigators did that. I mean, as we discussed with former FBI General Counsel James Baker on this show on Friday night, Mueller really appears to have only looked at criminal matters specifically, which means that this whole question of whether Russia was compromising people, whether Russia was trying to get leverage on people, whether there was a foreign influence operation underway that was targeting people who were then or would be involved in the U.S. government for the purposes of advantaging the Russian government over our government. All of those questions, to the extent that counterintelligence investigation was done, it appears that that was handled at the FBI, outside the confines of the special counsel's office, which means it was not under Robert Mueller's purview. It means it was under the purview of the FBI director, Chris Wray. Chris Wray is the one who appears to have been supervising the counterintelligence investigation, not Mueller. Mueller just did criminal. And as that revelation, I think, is slowly creeping across Washington and the news media and all of us, all of a sudden, we now find ourselves in day 3 of the president publicly attacking FBI Director Chris Wray, including saying now that under Chris Wray, quote, the FBI has no leadership. The director is protecting the same gang. So we'll have more on that in a second in terms of what happened to the intelligence part of this inquiry and what it means to have the president and now the attorney general appearing to turn the investigators into targets to go after the people who have been investigating this matter, particularly if the counterintelligence investigation is still live, as we are increasingly seeing the president turn against the FBI director, who we believe has been overseeing the counterintelligence part of this. We even saw a right-wing group connected to the president go after a specific named prosecutor on Mueller's team tonight. So we'll have more on that coming up. But there was one other landmark thing that happened in this big confrontation today, which is worth noting as it came up, which is that for the first time today, a court got involved. For the first time today, the judicial branch of government, the third branch of government, got involved in trying to police this question of whether or not the president and this White House can defy all subpoenas, right? Defy court orders, defy subpoenas, defy any incursion on what they want to do in terms of the law. Today, for the first time, a judge got into the middle of that, and it did not go well for the president and his lawyers. It really, really did not go well for them. But we've got that story next. Stay with us.
How do these other OTC medicines compare to Zysol? Well, looky here. Zysol works faster than Claritin and lasts up to 6 times longer than Benadryl. So for the latest and powerful relief that's just as effective at hour 24,
subpoena to the president's accounting firm, Mazars, to get them to hand over information about President Trump's financial history. The president has sued to block that subpoena. Well, today, a federal judge hearing that case took oral arguments from both sides. I think the Washington Post may have summed up how that went the best when Justice reporter Spencer Shue described the judge in today's hearing as, quote, astonished by President Trump's argument in trying to block that subpoena. Quote, a federal judge in Washington today expressed astonishment at arguments raised by President Trump's lawyers seeking to block his accounting firm from turning over years of financial records to the House Oversight Committee. And we're in this weird moment in this presidency where we've got the president and the White House trying to stop all testimony, to stop all document requests, to defy all subpoenas in all investigations. And, you know, that seems nuts as a matter of politics and history and how we know the three branches of government are supposed to work. But that argument from the Trump White House today, for the first time, got tested in court. And it got very, very blunt, very fast. I mean, at one point in today's hearing, right at the beginning of the hearing, the president's lawyers literally refused to concede to the judge that the Watergate investigation should have been allowed. That Congress should have been allowed to investigate Watergate. I mean, that's what this fight has arrived at already. We thought we were living in a world where U.S. v. Nixon was settled law, where presidents have to comply with subpoenas and court orders because, you know, America. For President Trump's lawyers today, in fighting one of these subpoenas for the president's financial information, they basically told the judge, yeah, that whole Watergate thing maybe shouldn't have ever been allowed to happen. Congress maybe shouldn't have been seen as having the power to investigate the Watergate crimes. This is from the transcript today in court. Quote, the judge, I'm just asking, could, for example, Congress say, we believe that the President of the United States is receiving payments from foreign governments, foreign interests, and we want to investigate that. We want to determine if that's so, and we're going to get financial records from him, from his entities, to make that determination. Congress does not have that power, in your view? President's lawyer. Not in the way you framed it, Your Honor. No, they don't. The judge, why not? President's lawyer. Because it is determining whether he's in compliance with law. The judge, I don't understand how that jibes with what I thought was your concession, that if the president was engaging in corrupt behavior in office that might violate a criminal law, that would be a proper subject of investigation. The president's lawyer, I'm sorry if I created any confusion, Your Honor. I don't think that is the proper subject of investigation as to the president. The judge says, okay, so in your view, Congress's investigations in Whitewater, for example, and Watergate were beyond the scope of Congress's constitutional authority? President's lawyer, I'd have to look at what the basis they were providing, and again, we have, at which point the judge interrupts, they were inquiring as to violations of criminal law. It's pretty straightforward. That was a federal judge in D.C. District Court today, the first judge to consider one of the many subpoenas that this president and this White House is defying, trying to get the president's lawyers to concede that Congress would have been allowed to investigate something like Watergate, right? Congress does investigate potential crimes by presidents, right? You concede that presidents can be investigated for crimes and stuff. President's lawyers stammering, but not willing to concede that. I mean, hard to tell from oral arguments, right? But from today's hearing, it doesn't sound like the president's lawyers are going to get away with this argument for long if the courts have anything to say about it. But as always, watch this space. Stay with us.
We bought a house in a neighborhood with a lot of other young couples. Then we noticed something strange. Oh, could you make me a burger?
Poof, you're a burger.
Everyone acts like their parents.
You have a tattoo.
Yes.
Fun. Do you not work?
So what kind of mower you got, Seth? I don't know. I have some kid comes over. We pay him to do it.
But it's not all bad. Someone even showed us how we can save money by bundling home and auto with Progressive.
Progressive can't protect you from becoming your parents, but we can protect your home and auto. You wouldn't accept an incomplete job from anyone else. Why accept it from your allergy pills? Flonase relieves your worst symptoms, including nasal congestion, which most pills don't. Flonase helps block 6 key inflammatory substances. Most pills only block 1. Flonase.
Investigation into the president's campaign and its contacts with Russia. He has tasked the U.S. Attorney for the great state of Connecticut, John Durham, to lead that review. But in addition to John Durham working on it, CNN was first to report today that they have also roped in the leaders of the intelligence community as well. Quote, Attorney General William Barr is working closely with the CIA to review the origins of the Russia investigation and surveillance issues surrounding Donald Trump's presidential campaign. Barr is working in close collaboration with CIA Director Gina Haspel, the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, and the FBI Director, Christopher Wray. The FBI Director, the CIA Director, and the Director of National Intelligence, they're all personally tasked now with working with a hand-picked federal prosecutor to investigate the counterintelligence investigation into Russia and what they did during the campaign. Number one, are we sure that investigation's over? And number two, what does it mean that the people who conducted and led that investigation are now themselves being subject to this new hybrid sort of non-official review involving the heads of all those agencies and reportedly the Attorney General personally as well? Joining us now is Jeremy Bash, former Chief of Staff at the CIA and at the Department of Defense under President Obama. Mr. Bash, thanks very much for joining us. Good to have you here.
Hey, Rachel.
So tell me what you make about this reported review. The CIA Director, the Director of National Intelligence, the Attorney General personally, and a hand-picked U.S. Attorney all being roped in to do some sort of review of this intelligence investigation.
Well, first, Rachel, the Attorney General has done a number of concerning things including mischaracterizing the Mueller report, misleading Congress about it, and then describing lawful surveillance as spying. He also has not spoken out forcefully against the president, saying he wanted to use the Justice Department to investigate a potential Democratic rival, Joe Biden. Those are all things we would expect the Attorney General to do. But there is a silver lining here, is that this move today by the Attorney General to allow John Durham to look at this matter, the U.S. Attorney in Connecticut, and to involve the leaders of the intelligence community looks to me, Rachel, like kind of what others in the Trump administration tend to do, which is tell the boss, yeah, we're working on it, but then do something short of what the boss expects. And I think involving Gina Haspel, involving Chris Wray, involving Dan Coats means that he's going to get the professional opinion of the intelligence leadership about really a silly question, which is whether or not the original investigation of Russia's efforts to attack our democracy were predicated, whether they were warranted. We know they were predicated. We know they were warranted.
Does it affect your thinking about this, or should it affect all of our thinking about this, that it appears that the counterintelligence investigation into what happened between the Trump campaign and Russia, this key question as to whether or not Russia tried to exert or did exert leverage over the man who's now president of the United States or people around him and in his administration, that appears nowhere in Robert Mueller's redacted report. Any counterintelligence findings about leverage, any discussion about the implications of stuff like the Trump Tower Moscow project or any other contacts between Russia and the campaign, it doesn't appear in what we've been allowed to see of Robert Mueller's work product. I mean, to me, that suggests that maybe that counterintelligence investigation was handled elsewhere in the FBI. It would have been under Wray's purview, not under Mueller's purview. That raises questions for me as to him being involved in a review of that investigation that he may still be supervising.
That's correct, Rachel. And in fact, the intelligence committees in Congress have the statutory jurisdiction to obtain any information about that counterintelligence review, including anything that's currently ongoing and being reviewed by the FBI, because, of course, the Russian Federation has not suspended its attacks on the United States and, in fact, may only be accelerating them. I think also important, Rachel, is the appointment of John Durham, the U.S. Attorney from Connecticut. You know, the Sebastian Gorkas of the world celebrated this and said this is Trump's secret weapon to take on the deep state. I don't think so. I worked a little bit with John Durham in 2008 and 2009 when he initially began to review CIA's destruction of the interrogation videotapes and then the abuse of detainees. And what John Durham did in that investigation was he was very thorough, I would say even slow. He was very methodical. At the end of the day, though, he did not bring any criminal charges against intelligence officers because, in his conclusion, they were following the legal opinions by the Justice Department. So I think if anybody thinks that John Durham is going to be a political pawn here, or he's going to find that, say, the FBI did something